So now we're ready to start executing the sprint. The first thing we're going to do is hold the sprint planning meeting. You're going to have the product owner, the development team, and the Scrum Master present. And the first thing we need to do is determine what we're going to work on. We've got our product backlog. It's prioritized by value with the things most important at the top. And we should also have a velocity, either an initial velocity we calculated or one that we've actually determined from empirical data. With a velocity of 11, we should be able to pick up these top 4 items off the product backlog. And it's okay for the product owner to come in expecting that based on the velocity. But we also have to remember capacity. The team may not be all present during this sprint. We have somebody who's out on vacation, there's going to be a conference, there's a mandatory company picnic. So even though we have this planning velocity, it's normally an average, and we have to address the capacity that we're going to have during that actual sprint. The team may then choose a little bit less because of these absences. Then the product owner could point out, we have this one down here. What if I move that up into the sprint? Could you do that with your current capacity? And that's a negotiation between the Scrum team and the product owner. We do want to be sure that we are still thinking about a sustainable pace. There's always going to be pressure to do more. So we want to make sure that the team is only bringing in as much as they feel comfortable committing to for the entire sprint. I want to talk a little bit about sprint lengths. When determining your sprint length, there's a lot of things that go into that decision. The domain knowledge of your team, the availability of your product owner. You want to make sure you don't go more than 4 weeks. That's usually too long to actually get good feedback loops. And you don't want to go smaller than 1 week because you may not be able to get enough value out. But it's totally up to you. Usually 2 to 3 weeks is about right. And you'll have to feel it out. But once you determine that length, you want to stick with that length and go with it. You never want to extend the sprint because you don't get everything done. You don't want to cut it off early in case you get done early. Bring more stuff in or just cut off at that time and place. The sprint is time box, and you want to make sure you stick to that time box. After you've determined what you're going to work on, it's nice to identify a sprint goal. This should be a couple of sentences about what you want to accomplish. So it might be something as simple as implement search catalog with advanced search options. It's like a mini product vision to give a general idea of what we're working on. And this should be something that's published someplace where everybody can get an idea of what is the team working on without having to go into the details of the product backlog and sprint backlog. So when you're creating the sprint backlog, you want your product owner and your Scrum team in the same room. The product owner is going to present the product backlog items that they've decided to commit to, answer any qualifying questions, and then the team will have a discussion and design. They'll talk about how they're going to implement some details, what they're going to test. They've been doing this hopefully with grooming, but now we're getting in more detail because we're actually going to start building this sprint. Once you're done with that, they should actually start breaking this out into small tasks. These tasks should represent everything they need to do during the sprint to get this catalog item completely done. That would be all the development tasks, documentation tasks if that's part of what you need to get done, testing, all of those things need to be tasked out. And you're also going to task these out and estimate them in hours. We don't have to be super precise. In fact, sometimes we use buckets of 2, 4, 6, 3 or 6, depending on the team, because when you say something like 1.5, you're giving it a little bit more accuracy than probably is there. It needs to be relatively close, but again, we're going to be monitoring this every day and find out if we're actually accurate or not. There's also a good acronym for creating these sprint backlog items. SMART. The S in SMART is for specific. Too many times I've seen people want to get through this quickly, and so they'll do develop this, test this. And then when we get 2 weeks into it, we often forget what we were talking about. You want to be specific and take time to actually write down what you meant. It also should be measurable. Something that I can tell, am I done? You don't want to use ambiguous language. You want to make sure that you are talking about something that you can finitely say, yes, I completed that. I want it to be achievable. Sometimes I've seen people put in tasks that are larger than the sprint or depend on things that they can't control, and it's something they can't actually achieve. So make sure that it is something that that team can actually achieve inside the sprint. It needs to be relevant. Sometimes people want to put tasks on there to justify their existence. I had to go work on this for this planning meeting for something outside of our sprint goal. That doesn't need to be a task on your backlog. That actually might show up as an impediment to doing your actual goals. So make sure it is relevant to the actual product backlog item that you're working on. And then T is time boxed. Just like we're time boxing the sprint, time box these tasks, because at the end of that time box you want to look and see, did I get this done? If not, why didn't I get it done? Are there more tasks? Is there an impediment? What's actually preventing me from getting this done? It gives you a little stopgap measure to make sure that you are accurately estimating these to a certain degree. Once you've created that sprint backlog for all the items that you've committed to, you should review it and make sure that there weren't any icebergs, things that you thought were small that now once you broke them up into all their parts are a lot bigger. After that discussion happens and you still feel that you've gotten enough that you can handle in a sprint, you want everybody to commit to this story. And it's actually something I have the teams actually say. We commit to delivering all these stories inside this sprint. And it gives a sense of responsibility to the team. We are giving them the power to set their own pace, but if you set your own pace, you want to make sure you are setting a pace that is achievable and that you can commit to. One technique I found for getting consensus when you're trying to get people to commit to a story or anything else is something called the fist of 5. A lot of times when you ask people, do you agree with this? You get a yes or no. But sometimes you might get a, yeah, and just by the tone of their voice you can tell they're not really bought in. The fist of 5 is something you can do of making a statement. Do we commit to this story? Do we commit to all these stories for this sprint? And count to 3, 1, 2, 3, and then everybody puts up 1 or 5 fingers. And what it is a range of how well you feel about that statement. A 1, I disagree, and I want to argue about this some more. I really don't think that's right. A 2 is, I'm not really sure, and I'd like to discuss it some more. You're close, but you want to have some discussion. A 3 is, I really don't care, let's move on. Also looks like a W, so we call that the whatever. 4, I agree with that, we're good. And then 5 is, rock on, I am so pumped, I totally support you. That way you get a range. If you ask for feedback and you do a fist of 5 and you get all 3s, I'd probably still have some discussion. Are we just moving on because you're tired of talking and we really don't have a consensus? Are there some trepidations? Let's see where we are. You get all 1s, you know you've got a problem, need to keep discussing it. So this is something you can use in many areas when your team is having contention. Often in the sprint planning meeting, I see people get caught up in the tasking too much. Whether they're watching somebody type it into Excel or some other tasking software, or everybody just wants to get out fast. And that's not what this meeting's about. It's not about the tasks. Even though those are an output, you want to make sure you're having a discussion about it. So often, I'll tell everybody, stop using the tool. And I'll get a whiteboard and I'll write design on one side and test on the other. I'll give a marker to a tester and a marker to a developer and say, go up there and have a discussion and draw it out. Draw designs, draw pictures of what you're going to do, draw symbols of this service or that service. And the tester, when you hear something that you want to test, write down that test. And it's a back and forth. Everybody's engaged and staring at people actually engaging in the product rather than just a bunch of tasks. Then when you're done, if you look at that whiteboard, all your tasks are there. And you can either record them later or you might have the Scrum Master act as a scribe. But that way you get out of just being concentrated on a tool or the tasks. Remember, this is about planning and having an understanding of what you're actually going to deliver during that sprint.